Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of the Bridging the Gap Between Theory and Practice webinar series, proudly presented by World Heritage USA with the support of the Historic Preservation Education Foundation. This series is designed to support emerging professionals in the field of heritage preservation by providing specialized training that helps bridge the disconnect between academic study and real-world application. Whether you're just beginning your career or are an established professional looking to revisit foundational concepts in a new way, this series offers insights and resources to deepen your knowledge and practice. In today's episode, we'll explore a cornerstone of preservation practice, heritage documentation. From measured drawings to 3D laser scanning, heritage documentation encompasses the wide range of tools and methods we use to record historic resources and communicate their significance. This documentation plays a foundational role in research, conservation planning, interpretation, and legal protection, and the technologies available today offer new opportunities to capture and share our built and cultural heritage in increasingly dynamic ways. In this session, we'll provide an overview of traditional and emerging documentation techniques, how they're used in various preservation contexts, and the value they bring to advocacy, storytelling, and stewardship. We'll also touch on professional standards, ethical considerations, and how to determine which method or combination of methods is appropriate for a given project. To guide us through this topic, we're joined by experts working in heritage documentation who will share their experience applying these tools across a range of heritage contexts. Whether you're new to heritage documentation or looking to expand your knowledge of available technologies, this conversation will offer insights and resources you can apply in your work. We encourage you to engage in today's discussion by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and be sure to visit the Bridging the Gap webpage after the webinar for additional resources to support further learning. So thank you for being with us here today, and let's get started. Our first speaker is Scott Keyes, a Secretary of the Interior qualified historian and architect. He currently serves as the Chief of Heritage Documentation Programs within the National Park Service. The programs, consisting of the Historic American Building Survey, Historic American Engineering Record, and Historic American Landscape Survey, document historic sites and structures across the United States through the creation of drawings, photographs, and historical reports. Prior to joining the National Park Service in 2021, Scott served as the Department of the Navy's Chief Technical Expert on Historic Architecture and Preservation of the Built Environment. He also worked as an architect at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, as a designer at various architectural firms in Canada and the United Kingdom. His educational background includes a degree in history from the University of California, Los Angeles, and a Master of Architecture from the University of Toronto. Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Katelynn. Hello, everyone. As Katelynn said, my name is Scott Keyes, and I work for the National Park Service. I have some slides that I will share with you, which will tell a little bit about the programs that I run. So thank you for joining us today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the programs that I run at the National Park Service, which are jointly called the Heritage Documentation Programs. And what those consist of are 3 interrelated programs. As Katelynn said, that's the Historic American Building Survey, the Historic American Engineering Record, and the Historic American Landscape Survey. All 3 of these surveys basically document historic properties throughout the country through drawings, photographs, and historical reports, and submit that documentation to the Library of Congress, where it's available as a national repository for information on our shared history of architecture, engineering, and landscapes. The programs actually started back in 1933 as a make work program under the New Deal for unemployed architects. The original proposal was seen as a response both to get people back to work, but also to record a kind of vanishing history of architectural resources throughout the country that were being lost at the time. Unlike programs that had preceded it, what was interesting about this program from the start, and which continues to be true today, is that it didn't just focus on monumental architecture. It focused on a wide breadth of different types of buildings and typologies, from the monumental down to the vernacular. And to this day, the collections are still really focused on trying to get all types and typologies of architecture and record them for posterity. Since its founding, the programs have been administered through a tripartite arrangement. This was created when they were started under the New Deal. And that arrangement includes the National Park Service, the Library of Congress, and various professional organizations such as the American Institute of Architects, the American Society of Landscape Architects, and the American Society of Civil Engineers. The Park Service administers the program. The professional organizations provide professional advice on their implementation, and the Library of Congress is the final repository for anything that's created through the programs. Obviously, I work for the National Park Service, so I'll let you know a little bit about what we do here to help document and preserve this information. A lot of people, when they think of the Park Service, think about the rangers that are out in national parks and Park Service run sites. But a lot of Park Service employees also work on the back end on various programs. I'm part of something called the Directorate of Cultural Resources, Partnerships, and Science. And under that, I'm part of a subdirectorate called the Inventory, Documentation, and Technical Assistance Group. That includes various programs. So my program, which we're going to talk about today, it also includes programs like the National Register of Historic Places, the National Historic Landmark Program, and Technical Preservation Services. So all of our programs, while we do work in parks, are actually focused more externally to provide support and assistance to other federal agencies and just the public in general on a variety of preservation-related items. Where the National Park Service comes into all of this is through various authorities that were given to the Secretary of the Interior under the National Historic Preservation Act. Obviously, our program actually predates the signing of the National Historic Preservation Act by 3 decades. But when this law was created, our role was codified into it. So under Section 101 of the Act, the Secretary of the Interior is responsible for promulgating regulations that establish a uniform process and standards for documenting properties for incorporation into a national historic architectural and engineering record collection at the Library of Congress. That authority, basically, we do that on behalf of the Secretary of Interior. And the ways that we do that is by administering a program that develops standards and updates standards on how to document things, reviewing documentation that comes in for these things, for these programs, and then also providing guidance and assistance to people that want to document properties. So here are, just for a quote, the 2 different parts of the National Historic Preservation Act that refer to the documentation of historic properties. The first one I read on the previous slide, which is developing a process and standards for doing this type of documentation. The other one is something that requires other federal agencies to do this type of documentation before they're going to demolish or substantially alter a building. And so my program helps the Secretary of the Interior and the National Park Service create these guidelines and standards, and then just administers the program generally. So the Secretary of Interior standards, which I referenced before, establish kind of minimum requirements for what goes into the HABS, HAER, HALS collections. Those are traditionally called 3 different levels of documentation. And the differences between these levels are just the types of materials that go into each level. So level 1, for instance, is a historical report, large format photographs, and measured drawings. Level 2 is a historical report, large format photographs, and reproductions of existing drawings. And then level 3 is a historical report and large format photographs. So to talk through all of those 3 things, and these are all the 3 materials that were initially in the collection when it was started as a program back in the 1930s, and to this day are still the foundational components of what we consider a survey that goes in to document a historic property. The first one is measured drawings. So those are put into the collection either as-built drawings or as drawings based on field measurements. This is an old drawing of Dam 4, which was a hydroelectric plant on the Potomac River near Washington, D.C. As you can see, it shows some of the mechanical equipment in it. It has notes so that you can understand what different equipment is. And one of the things that's important about the collection is trying to present information in a clear and concise manner so that academics, architects, students can look at this stuff and understand how the building is constructed, what it did, and the major components of it. This, by comparison, is a reproduction of a historic drawing. This is of the old blimp hangars at Moffett Field outside of San Francisco. So if there are existing drawings and we do not need to reinvent the wheel and draw something from scratch, that's perfectly acceptable, and we will reproduce them so that people can reference them. How do we create drawings, or how do people create drawings for the collection? The drawings that are created specifically for the collection are based on field surveys and field measurements. These are collected in a variety of manners. The most traditional is just hand measuring. So that's like pulling tape, like tape measures to measure a building, and then taking field notes on graph paper to indicate, the layout and plan of the building. This is a team taking field measurements at Ellis Island. I know Elizabeth will talk more about this in the second half of this presentation, but as technologies have evolved, we've been increasingly using those to do field measurements. One of those technologies, and the one we use probably the most to do these kind of surveys, is laser scanning. And I know you'll learn more about that later during the presentation. But that's basically where you have machines like the one here in the picture that emit lasers and then have a sensor that can tell when the laser refracts back to the sensor on the scanner, and it creates something called a point cloud. And you can see that down on the right-hand side. And we can use that to generate measurements and then generate architectural drawings from the 3D survey data. We also use something called photogrammetry, which we use more for sculptural elements. And again, Elizabeth will talk more about this. But this is where you take hundreds or thousands of photos of something, and there are computer programs which can analyze adjacencies in the photos and create kind of shockingly accurate three-dimensional models. This is one of a flagpole base at an American cemetery in France, which would be almost impossible to measure by hand. And also quite difficult to measure just with a traditional laser scanner. So this allows us to get very accurate surveys of this kind of sculptural and relief elements. So that's the way we collect information for drawings. Other components of the documentation include photography. Traditionally, since the 1930s, in the HABS HALS collections, at least, this has consisted of large format photography. So that is on film, which has a minimum dimensions of 4 inches by 5 inches. You can also submit it in 5 by 7 inch film and 8 by 10 inch film. It ends up with these kind of beautiful pictures like this one at Camp Curry in Yosemite National Park. What this looks like in practice, this is a picture from the 1960s of a HABS photographer taking a picture of a building. The equipment to do this kind of photography actually does not look very different. It kind of looks like you're in the Civil War or something with something called a view camera like this. Now, they take amazingly high resolution images when you capture things, and they have an archival standard of lasting hundreds and hundreds of years if they're stored properly. However, this technology, the expertise to do it, they're just kind of phasing out. So we've been working with the Library of Congress to develop standards for incorporating digital photography into the collection. And we've been doing some pilot projects with that. This is actually a digital image we took as a pilot project of the DeLorean from Back to the Future. The collection also includes things like historic cars and ships and planes. So hopefully we'll be rolling that out soon. We've been making a lot of progress with the library at developing those standards and finding ways in which the library can archive the digital photographs. And the last component of a traditional survey that goes into our collection is a historical report. And that's basically, it's very similar to kind of like a National Register nomination or something else of that type of study, where it tells you about the location, the significance of the property, and its character defining features. And this is basically so you have some context if you're looking at a set of architectural drawings or photographs to know what the building is, why it's important, when it was constructed, etc. And so those things basically are the major components of documentation in the collection. The collection's been around now for 90 years, so we've amassed quite a lot of documentation. There's over 45,000 properties that are documented in the collection. That includes 70,000 drawings, 300,000 photographs, and 250,000 pages of history. Most of it has been digitized by the Library of Congress and is available online for the public to use in any way that they want, because everything is in the public domain, and you can access that through the Library of Congress's website. This is a collection of where we store the actual analog hard copy versions of this, and that's at Fort Meade, which is an old Army base outside of Washington, D.C. in Maryland. Where does documentation that comes into our collection come from? 20% is still done in-house by a team of architects, historians, and photographers that we have on staff here in my office. 45% of it is done by other federal agencies as mitigation. So I was saying other federal agencies are required to do this before they demolish or substantially alter a building. And then 35% of it is donated work. So that's coming from student groups, university classes, state level mitigation through state historic preservation offices, and then just interested professionals that want to donate documentation that they've created to the collection. Since I'm talking to a group of young professionals, I thought I would focus on the third one of these, which is the donated work, and tell you about various opportunities you could have to participate in this if it's something that interests you. If you are a student or a recent graduate, we do offer various opportunities to get involved with the Park Service in documentation. One of them is through internships that we advertise annually. The most traditional one are summer field schools, where groups of students will go out and help us to survey and document buildings for the collection, or landscapes, or engineering. We also have fellowships such as the Sally Crest Tompkins Fellowship, which is an architectural history fellowship for someone who wants to do a historical study of a specific resource. And we also have a variety of design and documentation competitions. The main ones are one called the Peterson Prize, which is to create a drawing set that documents an existing building. There's a Holland Prize, which is a one-sheet drawing of a property. And then finally, something called the Historic American Landscape Survey Challenge, which is a historical report-focused competition where people go out and write historical reports about the significance and history of various types of historic landscapes. If you're interested in any of these things, you can find information on our website. Just Google it, or here's the link. You can also, outside of the competitions, just donate materials to the collection. We're always very happy and willing to accept donations to the collection. You can find more information about donating material, whether it's a history, photographs, or drawings, to the collection on our website as well. This, for example, were some students at the University of Virginia who were documenting crab shanties on Tangier Island out in the Chesapeake. And then donated it to the collection through one of the competitions. So we're always happy to help anyone that's interested in trying to create this kind of documentation. And we do create various guidance documents and templates and other things to help you. You can find that on our website as well. So those are like templates for CAD files, history templates, templates for laying out photography sheets, and then random guidance documents that deal with various things, such as like how to survey a building in the field, how to produce drawings, photography, etc. And you can find that all on our website as well. Finally, you can always just reach out to anyone on staff here. Here's my contact information, but you can also find the contact information for our program on our website. So please, if you're interested, please reach out, and we'd be happy to talk to you about documentation or contributing to the collection. In the last few minutes, before I hand it off, I also wanted to talk about what this documentation is used for. Obviously, we're trying to create a repository of information for future generations about American architecture, engineering, and landscapes. But we're also using this documentation to help on physical preservation projects, a lot of that within the Park Service. So one of the main things that we do with it is create this documentation to help preservationists out in the parks maintain and rehabilitate buildings. For example, this is the Weir Farm National Historic Site in Connecticut. It has a large collection of Impressionist art in it, but it did not have any climate control system because it's in an old 1700s farmhouse. So they also did not have drawings based on the age of the building. There's no architect, it's a vernacular house. So we'll go in, we'll scan the building, and then we will create a set of measured drawings that then we can pass back off to the park, and they can pass off to engineers to create a baseline for them to make sensitive rehabilitations and interventions into the building. Another way that this documentation is used is in case things are unfortunately destroyed by things like earthquakes or fires. This is a early 19th century Russian Orthodox chapel in California. It was documented in the 1960s by the HABS program, and then was unfortunately destroyed by fire in 1970. Luckily, because it was documented, there was a full set of drawings of all the details, plan sections, elevations of the chapel, which allowed it to be reconstructed. And so it's still there in Fort Ross State Historical Park in Northern California. And so those are just other ways in which this is not just an academic exercise, but can be used to help preserve and rehabilitate historic properties. So with that, I thank you guys for listening to my presentation. I'll see if I can stop sharing. And I look forward to talking more with all of you afterwards if you guys have any questions.
Thank you so much, Scott. And thank you for sharing all of those amazing resources, templates, standards. We'll be sure to link all of those on our website. So that way, if any of you would like to see those, take a closer look, they'll be easy to access. So Scott, I'm also looking to revisiting some of your points during the Q&A. But first, let's move on to our second speaker, Elizabeth Lee. Elizabeth currently serves as Vice President of Programs and Development for CyArk, and her expertise includes developing international partnerships in support of technology-driven solutions for cultural heritage protection, education, and appreciation. Originally trained as an archaeologist with excavation experience in Turkey and Hungary, Elizabeth has been applying 3D technologies to the cultural field for 2 decades. She has extensive experience in working with foreign governments and local communities, including cultural ministries and UNESCO. Elizabeth is a graduate of University of California, Berkeley, and she serves as an advisory member for the Oxford Brooks Endangered Wooden Architecture Program and is a member of the U.S. National Committee for ICOMOS. In the past, she's also won the South by Southwest Eco Place by Design competition. So Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. It's really nice to be here, and thank you, Scott, for setting a lot of this up. So yeah, really nice to be here. Just as a means of introduction, CyArk, for those of you that aren't familiar, we're a nonprofit organization. We've been around for over 20 years now, really working at the intersection of 3D technology and cultural heritage, with this mission of unlocking the power of this technology to make these sites accessible to new audiences, but also future generations. We're based in the Bay Area, although now we're a completely remote team since the pandemic. And we were really one of the early pioneers in applying 3D technology to cultural heritage. So we have not been around as long as the Heritage Documentation Program, but we have been using a lot of the technologies that Scott shared, yeah, since our creation. And a big part of the work that we do today is about using this data to create emotional connection between people and places. So I'll talk a little bit about what we do and the technologies in a little bit more detail, and then I'm going to talk about some of the work that we use to utilize this underlying data to help in the interpretation of these places. So our work as an organization focuses on doing this documentation, this 3D documentation. We also do a lot in what we call storytelling, but it's really interpretation. And then we also do a lot in terms of training. So we run trainings with individual organizations. I'll put up a slide around the training that we do offer. Just within the last year, we have started offering online courses for folks that are interested in learning more about the methods. And then we do have a program usually once a year that we offer one of those training programs via like a scholarship too. So something to keep an eye out for. In terms of the documentation, the way that we think about our methodology has evolved a lot in our 22 years. And where we started initially with just that LiDAR or laser scanning technology, at this point we now use a technique which we call like sensor fusion, where we're utilizing that LiDAR data in addition to photogrammetry to create and we're fusing those two different data sets to create a really comprehensive documentation of the site. Just to do a little bit more on what these technologies are, because I know Scott hit on this as well. But photogrammetry is a process of creating 3D from two-dimensional images. So you can see in some of these all represent individual images or camera positions. How does it work? It works very similarly to parallax, right? In terms of something you can check yourself. Put your thumb out, put it over an object away from you, and close one eye while looking at your thumb, and then open the other eye. You're going to see a slightly different picture, and that's how our eyes are creating the 3D world around us. So it works much the same way in terms of moving the camera around the site. We do this both in terms of walking around with a camera in our hand or having it on tripods. There are also rigs that others have developed to capture this all in one single shot. We also use images that we've taken from the air using drones. But again, moving around the site, getting lots of different perspectives, and then that image is merged together in a software program. There are many out there. The one that we use primarily is a piece of software called Reality Capture. The other technique that we use is LiDAR or 3D laser scanning. And what this does is it sends out a pulsed beam of light, and it basically measures how long it takes to hit a surface and bounce back. And it does this hundreds of thousands of times a second. In the same way that we move cameras around the site, we also have to move the scanners around the site. The scanner can only see, it can only capture what it can see. So, this is work that we did at the Lincoln Memorial. You can just see one perspective on that building. So we end up moving the scanner around the building to have it be more complete. So you can actually see here, these blue dots in this image show lots and lots of different scanner positions. So work on site, and then in the post-processing using various pieces of software. We use a piece of software called Ferrocene and another one called Leica R360 to be able to merge all of these individual scans together into a single point cloud. Some of the limitations for LiDAR is these occlusions, right? So we can also get people captured in the scan. It takes several minutes per scan, so the scene can change a little bit versus a single image. And then there are just certain objects that actually don't work very well when it comes to LiDAR and photogrammetry as well, any kind of reflective or transparent surfaces. So in this sensor fusion methodology, the emphasis is to actually bring these two things together. So we bring together this LiDAR point cloud registration, we bring together aligned photogrammetric images, and then that allows us to create a really high resolution 3D model. And then I'm just going to go ahead and play this video. This is kind of a repeat of some of the things that I've just been talking about. But this is an example from a project we did in Mexico City at the Metropolitan Cathedral. So there's the LiDAR device in action. You can again see all of those different positions that we had to move the machine into. And this is what a registered point cloud looks like. Then we supplement that with photogrammetry. So we use tripods, we use handhelds, and again, you can see all those individual kind of triangles are the cameras. So individual photographs, and the computer software uses those shared points to match it up. And then we fly over the site when we're able with drones. There are many restrictions to drone use, and so we have to abide by those rules as well. But then we bring those two things together, and then that gives us a very high resolution, accurate phototexture 3D model that then we can cut through. We can use this to bring into an architectural program and actually do those measured drawings. We can measure just right on those orthorectified images as well. So in terms of documentation for supporting any kind of active conservation or preservation on the site, this is our primary methodology. I did want to hit on what is next, because our team is also working now. There's a evolving technology which is really kind of exciting, called Gaussian splatting, and it's a way to make 3D scenes from photos or videos. And so different from creating that mesh, it actually places a lot of these kind of color spots or splats in the 3D space, and it shows what the camera saw from that position. So rather than trying to form a solid mesh from these images or the scans, it's really creating this more ephemeral cloud, and you actually get the full visual of what the cameras seen. So you get the sky, you get trees, and it works really, really well for natural elements in the environment, things that maybe wouldn't capture well with the traditional technology. So yeah, we're using it in environments where there are trees or gardens or things, anything that's reflective water. Really not ideal for things where we would need this measured drawing, because it's not creating this mesh that we can bring in to actually take measurements from. But for visualization and for interpretation, it's quite effective. So just an example from a project at the Cesar Chavez National Monument, the Memorial Garden, capturing this fountain via photogrammetry. We get a lot of errors with the water. Here we're able to capture that kind of flash frame with the fountain and actually have this in a 3D space. So it gets pretty interesting in terms of what's possible in that, again, for visualization and interpretation. I mentioned training, and we can share this out too, but we have a couple of courses coming up. We're not doing any training yet in the splat capture, but I see that on the horizon as our team gets better with this new methodology. And then we are offering a discount code for ICOMOS, ICOMOS 20, to get 20% off on the courses that we offer. I did also just want to then hit on how we're using this in a very different way than the Heritage Documentation Program, just around capturing and creating a sense of a place using this 3D capture technology. So a lot of our work today focuses on storytelling called spatial storytelling, and it's our approach to creating experiences that immerse visitors in the stories of a place. And so we think about how to bring people back into that. It's not just about documentation of the built environment. How can we tell people stories? How do we create a sense of presence, especially in a virtual environment? And then, yeah, how can we feature multiple perspectives on the same place, and also maybe let people see the place in a way that they can't when they're physically there. And the primary way we do this is through a platform that we've developed called Tapestry. So we have nearly 50 of these Tapestry experiences. It's like a 3D virtual tour. And so it utilizes these 3D models as kind of the underlying canvas for storytelling. And we layer on top of that, formal narrative as well as like video interviews with people about these places and why they're important. And then we can also feature historic media and things like that. So yeah, we have the opportunity to pull in multivocal perspectives. So we have a section which we call voices. So, and these are voices that kind of stick with you through the experience. You also have the opportunity to explore in 3D. And then, yeah, we can provide kind of additional context through other multimedia. The best way to explain it is to maybe show a few case studies. So this is a project that we did at the USS Utah Memorial as part of Pearl Harbor. And in this case, our team was able to utilize some existing documentation. It's a National Park Service site. The National Park Service also has a underwater resources team. So they had previously gone out and done some photogrammetry imaging of the submerged portion of the ship, but had difficulty bringing this all together and especially in sharing it too. So although they had digitized a lot of this, it was difficult to make that available. And so I'm going to go ahead and just show my screen here. Of this is the experience that's live on our site now. So when I hit start, you'll actually hear some of the narration, and then I'll probably mute it to talk over it. But this is the published experience now.
Welcome to the USS Utah Memorial at Pearl Harbor, sometimes referred to as the Forgotten Ship. Found on the tropical island of Oahu, Hawaii.
So you get a sense of the challenge of this location. There's the ship itself is submerged in the water. That the typical visitor experience here, if you're able to get to this location, because it was actually on an active base, is that you can come to this viewing platform, but you're not able to get very up close. And it's actually quite difficult for visitors to get here, which is why we worked with the park to make this available. So we have the underlying model, but then throughout the experience, you actually get to connect with others that are connected to the site. So we have video interviews with a naval historian. We also have a National Park Service interpreter. And then we were able to work with recently digitized oral histories from survivors. So throughout the experience, you actually get to connect with different survivors from this location. So just to give you an idea of how it works, we have these different scenes. I'm going to buzz through a few of them. We can pull in other elements. So in this case, we have a historic image of what the ship would have looked like at its kind of full might. And at the end of the scene, you can look around, you can listen to the interviews, but we also are able to incorporate other kinds of images and historic resources. But I want to go ahead and come under here just to take you all under the water. So this is where then we are able to utilize that existing documentation and bring that together. Our team did additional above ground documentation. But really giving people access to a portion of the site that they normally would never be able to see. And that's thanks to documentation that was done by the National Park Service and being able to combine these two together. So you get to explore under here a little bit, and then there are other assets that you can click on. And so this is an example of these salvage cables that they had originally tried to raise the ship, and it was ultimately unsuccessful. But you get to see them there under the water. And the rather than show the video, yeah, the park is using this now really to provide virtual access to this site. And so you can go to their website, take the tour, and we have thousands of people visiting this every month. So it's been a really successful way to, again, connect people to a resource that's a little bit harder to access. And then just the other quick example that I'll just buzz through is, I won't show the tapestry for this one. I'll let you do that in your free time, but this is from Cliff Palace at Mesa Verde. So we worked with the National Park Service to do documentation of this site, to create a 3D model. But a big part of what the Park Service wanted to do is that a lot of their interpretation on site is really just from the National Park Service perspective, and does not incorporate many of the indigenous communities that have a very strong connection to this place. So we worked with the National Park Service and 3 of their indigenous interns to actually create this experience. So within the experience, you get to hear from a park archaeologist, but you also get to hear from 3 different individuals that are connected to 3 different tribal communities that have linkages to the site. And so it ends up being a really powerful way to connect to this place. And I'm not sure why that's not loading. The images are not loading, sorry. But so we have this interactive experience, and then we've further been able to use this data to actually incorporate into a museum exhibit with the Museum of Science in Boston that focused around cultural heritage and climate change, which is called Changing Landscapes. So with that, I'll keep to time, but I encourage people to go and check out the Tapestry Library, and also check out any of our training and grant programs that we offer. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was an amazing presentation. In addition to all the applications of documentation, I thought it was particularly interesting to see how this kind of work can also facilitate storytelling, amplifying voices that maybe we wouldn't hear if we were to visit the site by ourselves, or also just being able to see places that aren't easily accessible, like the ship. If you can't walk up to it, if you can't scuba dive at the site, how else are you going to see it? So thank you so much. At this point, I'd like to transition into the Q&A portion of the webinar. So Scott, if you'd like to join us once again. And to everyone in the audience, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask Liz, Scott, both, please submit them via the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. We do already have a few questions, so I'm just going to jump on into it. This first one, I think would be best directed to Scott, because in your introduction, I mentioned that you're a Secretary of the Interior qualified architect and historian. And so this person asked, how do you become Secretary of the Interior qualified? I too have seen mention on job postings that they request familiarity with Secretary of Interior standards, but how do you become qualified? How do you demonstrate that you're familiar with these standards when you're applying for positions?
Okay, so just to start off, there's not like a certificate or a badge or anything you get that says you're a Secretary of Interior qualified professional. What that refers to is that for preservation, there's a lot of Secretary of Interior standards. The ones I talked about in my presentation were for documentation. There's one called the Secretary of the Interior Professional Qualification Standards. And what those are within the government mainly, and then other kind of state governments or other people that are adjacent, is basically setting up minimum requirements for different types of disciplines, whether it's architecture, historic architecture, archaeology, other ones as well. And it usually has a degree requirement and a experience requirement. And so if you're applying for jobs that require you to have Secretary of Interior qualifications, or applying for government contracts that require Secretary of the Interior qualified professional, it's basically the person, whoever is, doing the job search or the contracting or something, would look at your qualifications through your resume and your academic history and just assess on their own whether you meet those qualifications. It's a very complicated answer, but hopefully that answers what that means.
No, that's great. Liz, is being familiar with Secretary of the Interior standards something that also private firms look for, or is it mostly just for civil servant positions?
Yeah, I think, yeah, so we're we're, yeah, as a nonprofit, we're sort of in this like weird space in between, but yeah, private or public organization. Yeah, I know a lot of the firms that we do work with on different projects have people that have a lot of expertise in this area. And I know for Scott mentioned that, a lot of the documentation that does come in to them is actually being generated through other groups under, specific mandates. So I know a lot of private firms, that's a big advantage to have familiarity and knowledge of those standards.
Okay. And still relating to standards, we received another question that asks, how often are documentation standards updated? So Scott, I think this has to do with what you were talking about earlier with regards to measured drawings, photography, etc.
All right. Okay. I'll try not to get too in the weeds here either. The Secretary of the Interior standards are quite broad, and they're not really updated. They're just more of aspirational goals for how what the documentation should fulfill. The technical standards that tier off of those are updated probably every 15 years or so. And then on top of that, we usually will update our own guidance documents that tell you how to meet those standards. So the technical requirements for how to meet those standards, I would say, are updated like per decade. It doesn't happen very quickly, but usually the standards themselves do not change, and then just the guidance on how to meet those standards will be updated as technology and materials change.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kind of related, that brings something to my mind, which I'd like to pose to Elizabeth. Technology moves fast. We see it all the time. So I was wondering, how do you stay on top of new technologies and advancements? Like, where do you learn about them? And maybe how long would it take to implement these new technologies at CyArk?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. Yeah, it does move very fast, and I think we've gone in different cycles where, um, because I think this is something that like academia is great at, right? The exploring these things, doing research, developing new technologies. We're not an academic group. We do a lot of practical projects, and so we have to strike a real balance on how we stay aware of what's out there and how we do our own kind of R&D, versus jumping on something maybe too early, or trying to implement something on a real project for us when the technology is not has not been tested. And so the example that I gave with the Gaussian splatting, that is something that's moving incredibly fast. A lot of that is powered off of image recognition, AI technology, and it's moving quite quickly. We have been watching it as a technology, I would say, for about 18 months, and doing little experiments here and there. And by watching it, I mean, we have Reddit and social media and all kinds of things that we follow in different groups. There's a really good community in the 3D capture space, through on a lot of pick your platform, LinkedIn or whatever, where there's a lot of people share resources. And so that's one way that we really kind of keep track of it. And we've just done a lot of experimentation. I think from our perspective, the technology is getting to a point where we can actually incorporate it into real projects. But that's a fine line, I think, always with new technology. And then again, you have to look at the I think, what is the purpose of the project? I think the great thing about heritage documentation programs, they have a set standard. You know what the end deliverable is and where that's going. I think we always, as a kind of outside organization, we have to say, okay, well, what is the point of this project? Is this to go and create archival documentation, or is it being used to support an active conservation project? That means a certain set of tools. Is this really just an interpretation or storytelling project? That might mean a different set of tools.
And just because you mentioned it a little in passing, AI is a big buzzword these days, and I think the humanities sector has been probably a little more hesitant to incorporate it for various reasons. But are you seeing applications and uses of AI in heritage documentation or interpretation? Does it even have a place in heritage documentation and interpretation?
Yeah, I think again, just with the technology development, I think, so yeah, powering a lot of the software that's bringing these images together, that's been using like computer vision and things like this for a long time. I think there's a lot of development that's happening right now that I think is going to greatly impact the field. I know that people have been longing for and asking, if you have this detailed point cloud that's measurable, why can't you just feed that into a program and it could just extract, HABS level drawings? We're not there yet, but I think that is something that could happen quite soon, right? If you feed it really good data, and that survey is done really well, I feel like a lot of that automation could be coming.
Okay, interesting. Something to keep an eye on in the future. Here I have a question, I think, for Scott. This person asks or mentions that they're curious how the Heritage Documentation Program is thinking about the development of heritage and historic BIM standards, and whether this is part of the long-term strategy of heritage documentation programs in the NPS.
So we don't actually use BIM that much in what we do. I think one of the main reasons of that is, to my knowledge of using BIM quite a long time ago, it sets up kind of standard constructions like wall constructions, window details, door details, and a lot of what we do, things aren't standard just based on the age of the materials we're working on. So what we're doing is basically creating traditional architectural plans out of 3D scan data, photogrammetry, and things like that. As Elizabeth was saying, I think in the very near future, AI and various computing modernization and just leaps forward in technological advances will probably create instances in which you can convert scan data into more kind of BIM applications and have it be used to generate things that you need for construction and preservation projects. But so far, we haven't done that. Most of our standards are more about the byproduct at the end of it. So, the material and the content in the archivability standards. We have never developed standards for how you collect that data. We have guidance on it, but it's not something that we generate standards for. It's more the standards of what that data looks like on the back end for our own collection. As Elizabeth was saying, there's a lot more to documentation than just HABS, HAER, HALS documentation. Depending on what you're using it for, you can be using it as an archival record. You can be using it for architectural projects. You can be using things mainly for interpretation, and they'll have different standards of how you want to collect data, the level of accuracy you want that data to have, the level of kind of just graphic interest you want that data to have. I think it really changes project by project based on the intent of the project. And so for that reason, we have not really gotten into, and I don't think it's our kind of purview to get into developing standards for how you collect that data three-dimensionally.
Okay.
I would say one thing that has been worrying me a little bit is the archivability of this digital data in the future. Like there's a lot of people collecting digital data, but the question of whether it will exist in 15, 20 years. So I know some people are starting to work on that, but standards of archivability for various types of three-dimensional data is something that would probably be useful, just because I worry that as technology advances, something that maybe was collected now, if there isn't plans in place to kind of properly archive that, might, if it's not kind of migrated forward, it might start to disappear if it's just kind of out there in the ether as like a digital file. So that is one thing that I'm interested in.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And goes to show that no matter how far technology advances, there's still something to be said for traditional measured drawings, photographs, even the machine that not the machine, the camera that you had in your presentation, the one that looks like it's from the Civil War era. How, yeah, digital photography has developed so much, but I've seen those photographs that those cameras make. The resolution is incredible. So, um, but kind of related to this person asks, what digital programs should I become familiar with if I want to work in heritage documentation? And then in parentheses, they have both like civil servant positions or private firm positions. So maybe if both of you could list some of your top programs that you think would be useful, maybe even ones that are the skills of that program are more transferable if they come across a position where they need to learn a specific program for that specific organization. Scott, can we begin with you? Or do you need time to think?
I was going to say Elizabeth probably would have a more comprehensive list. There's a lot of programs that do it. There's different scanning technologies and companies that will have programs that tier off of that kind of stuff. So we use Leicas, not saying they're better or worse than any other ones, just the ones that our office uses. So we have various programs that are based on Leica scan software. Faro is another one that has scanners that have different programs that allow you to work with that data. I'd say more than just a program to get, if you're interested in doing this as a field work, to get in to learn how the technologies work more as a practice. And then you can apply that to whatever kind of system that you're working on. So learning how to survey properly, how to create control networks if you need them, how to target things like that. And then just how to kind of work in 3D space. And I think once you have those skills, you can apply them to various programs depending on the company pretty easily. And so that's what I would say. I would say most civil servants do not get to do the fun things that people in my office do of actually going out in the field and doing this. And so if you're interested in that from a civil service perspective, I think it's really more about being familiar with laws and standards and regulations and things that allow you to understand how to take this technology and implement it within the constructs of the federal government.
I think that's a great point, Scott. I was going to say similarly, like there are a huge number of softwares there, and I can drop a few names in terms of what we use, but I think at the core, really kind of understanding the way how these technologies work and those kind of core methods, whether that's about how we capture this data, between LiDAR and photogrammetry, there's a lot of shared, and even the splatting now is a new technology. There's a lot of shared kind of methodologies between there and traditional survey, right? So understanding kind of the basic mechanics is pretty key. And then on the software side, I think a lot of the heavy lifting is happening in that software, and there's a number of different ones. I mentioned reality capture. I'll just mention that again because they've changed the pricing on it, and it's free for most everyone at this point. So it's a great piece of software. It's one that we use. It will take LiDAR data that we process in other like Leica and Faro softwares, but we bring that into reality capture, and you can take photos and just be doing photogrammetry in there. They have paid models for bigger firms if you earn over a certain amount, but for most individuals, it's going to be totally free. And so that's a great one to check out. And then I think the other thing that I would just mention kind of across the board is that there are just some kind of core competencies, I think, around documentation that are always going to come up. And I would say like CAD, knowing like AutoCAD or an equivalent, is going to be hugely helpful. Knowing the Adobe kind of creative suite with Photoshop and things is always going to be helpful. Lightroom for photo management, and we use other specialized software, but I think the CAD bucket and like the photo bucket is always going to be super helpful across a lot of disciplines, whether you're doing the documentation in the field or just like having to review these things. A familiarity with those programs goes a long way.
Awesome. I love that you mentioned a free program. I found, especially even in my academic journey, that a lot of the times when trying to broach these technologies, especially when they weren't yet covered in university programs, it was hard to find the right training that was accessible, the right programs that were accessible. It seemed like everything costs an arm and a leg. So I love when we're able to share kind of free, low cost, easily found sources of information, programs that people can be familiar with. So, and of course, these are all going to be linked on our webpage for Bridging the Gap on World Heritage USA in the future. So that way, if you guys are interested, again, in learning more, in remembering what programs were dropped in this webinar, you'll be able to access them there. The webinar is also going to be recorded and made available online for future reference as well. Again, if you have any last minute questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A. I'm just going to give one more that maybe ask one more that would potentially be useful to our audience. So Scott and Elizabeth, if both of you could share the best piece of advice you received in your career journey, something that really helped or that gave you encouragement or that encouraged you to think outside of the box, just something that you remember really helping to you in your journey to where you are today. If one of you already has one, I don't know how much time you might need to think or reflect.
I mean, I can do one right off the top of my head that I've kind of used. I kind of came in backwards to preservation. I was a design architect, and during the recession back in 2008, I took a job at Pearl Harbor as an architect there. They found out I had a history degree, and they stuck me in the historic preservation office. And I said, I don't know anything about historic preservation. And my boss at the time said, well, it's all just based, your job is just based on a series of laws and regulations. So read those laws and regulations and just follow them and you'll figure out how to do the job. And don't just rely on what people tell you the job is. And I've always kind of thought that whatever you're getting into, try to look at the basics of how that thing functions, and what the requirements of that are, not just applying to government work, but technology and everything. Try to understand the core of how that thing works so that you can develop an idea of how to negotiate in that and not just rely on what people tell you is the way that something works or the way you have to do something. And I think if you can kind of get back to the basics and then consider everything that you learn within that framework, I think it helps to determine what's essential, how you can kind of break new ground and things like that. So, I know it's maybe a little abstract, but
That's
Yeah,
really good.
solid piece of advice, especially if you're coming into something that you don't know as much about. How can you kind of fill those gaps? I feel like reading the rules and regulations is a good place to start. So thanks so much. Liz?
Yeah, mine's maybe more a soft skill one. I think, early in your career, like you want to, you might do like what I would call like the grunt work for a while, and then at some point you're like, I'm better than this. I must be doing these other things out there. And I think what I've learned, CyArk's a very small organization, and that we all have to do those little pieces of work that keeps everything running. And I think a piece of advice, when I was kind of getting frustrated with others, our founder, a gentleman named Ben Kassira, who's just an incredible person and has a TED Talk out there that everyone should watch around this subject. But he told me, he said, your ego can't get in the way here. He said your ego has to be so big that no one can see it, as in you have to feel so secure in how you are as yourself that you can't let these little things bother you, and that it's really just about getting it done and contributing to something else. And sometimes that means doing things that you don't want to do, or sometimes having difficult interactions with partners or clients or whatever it is. But I think that still sticks with me, of just taking that breath and realizing that everyone's got to do some of this stuff, and sometimes it's not about you and your own ego. That if you can set that aside, you're going to have a much more productive conversation and day and everything. So yeah, nothing to do with preservation, but more just a good piece of advice that I try to recall often, because it can be hard.
Yeah, solid advice all around. Well, there's no more questions in our Q&A, so I'll close out here. Thank you both so much for joining us today. It was great to hear about the standards and the work that you're doing in the federal government, Scott, to make sure that all of this precious information is maintained, updated, and archived. And Elizabeth, to see how these technologies are being pushed forward by organizations such as CyArk to not only document sites, but also communicate why they're important and the stories of people who find them important as well. So once again, thank you for being here, to both you both and everyone in our audience. And we'll see you for the next episode in October. So I'll close out here and wish you all a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.